Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're really glad you could join us today for First Look Insights, the 2026 State of Data Integrity and AI Readiness panel. AI is moving incredibly fast, and it's influencing nearly every organization's data strategy right now. But one of the questions that keeps coming up is how ready are companies really? And that's exactly what this year's new research between Precisely and Drexel University's LeBeau College of Business set out to uncover. What's the current state of data integrity, including the strategies, priorities, and challenges organizations are facing as they push forward with AI? Drexel is one of only a small number of private universities with the prestigious Carnegie R1 classification for very high research activity, and its Center for Applied AI and Business Analytics is known for strong academic collaboration with industry partners like Precisely. So what did we do? We surveyed over 500 data and analytics leaders across major industries to get a clear picture of what's working, what's stalling, and where the biggest gaps still exist. Today is meant to be a first look discussion. We'll walk through the headline findings and then hear perspectives from our panel on what this means for data integrity and AI success in the year ahead. So let's meet today's speakers. You have myself, moderator, Antonio Catronio, Director of Product Marketing here at Precisely. We have Mergen Anandarajan, Vice Dean and Academic Director of Dornsife Office for Experiential Learning, LeBeau College of Business at Drexel University, and Dave Schumann, Precisely's own Chief Data Officer. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to welcome in our panelists. So Dave, Mergen, thank you so much for being here with us today. And we're really going to jump right into our conversation. I've had a chance to talk a little bit about the methodology of how we produced the report together already. A little bit about Drexel and LeBeau. So if it's all right with you, I'm going to go ahead and just start our conversation. So one of the things to me that stood out in the research is the gap between the AI perception and reality of what's happening in the market. And most leaders believe that their organization is AI ready, yet the same leaders cite data readiness and skills and infrastructure as some of the biggest blockers that they have with getting AI to scale and to be able to accomplish many of the things that they needed to accomplish within their business. And so there's a bit of a disconnect, between those two things, which explains why so many of the AI initiatives, they look really promising early on, but struggle to really scale into production. So I'm really interested to understand from you two some of your thoughts around that. And we're going to start with Mergen. Where do you see some of that biggest disconnect between the confidence and the reality?
Right. Thank you, Antonio, for the question, and thank you for having me here. That's a really good question, and I think it's got to do with how organizations define AI readiness. I think it's all based on that. Now, when you talk to leaders, they equate readiness with having an AI strategy, having a few pilots in place, access to modern tools. So that's how they see AI readiness. But I think AI readiness really becomes real when AI collides with the organizational realities, where they have to meet messy data. Who owns the data? It's really unclear. And then you have all these legacy systems in play. You have regulatory concerns. Then you have human judgment. So when you take all those things together, not separately, but all those things together, it gets really complex. So I think the biggest gap, the research shows that the biggest gap is where organizations are really confident at the strategic level, but they're not really ready when it comes down to the execution level. So once AI touches the real decision, that's when the gap comes up. So to answer your question, I think the biggest disconnect is the definition. One party sees it at a strategic level, thanks to all the pilots and modern tools. But when the AI hits the road, hits the decisions, that's when they realize, oops, there's a problem here.
Dave, I see you nodding there. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I feel that Mergen and I are going to spend a lot of time agreeing with each other today. And so I believe that the biggest disconnect comes from measuring readiness at the wrong altitude. So many organizations judge maturity based on whether they bought the tools or they deployed a platform or they have a strategy. But the real readiness lives deep in the operational foundation. So metadata, lineage, lifecycle management, consistent ownership. And when those elements are weak, everything above them becomes fragile. The research highlights this clearly. Most leaders believe they're aligned to business outcomes, but only a fraction have measurable KPI linked results.
Mm.
That gap between aspiration and operational truth is where confidence begins to drift away from reality. And until organizations build durability beneath the surface, their perceived readiness will continue to outpace what they can actually sustain.
So what tends to, when people are trying to get these initiatives up and running, obviously they're trying to solve some of their organization's biggest challenges with AI. Like, what tends to break when teams try to scale beyond some of those initial pilots?
I,
And
I think,
Mergen, we'll go to you first. Yeah.
yeah, I think one of the first things that break the data quality and consistency, right? It is tolerable when it's pilots, but once you start getting AI to operate continuously with real-time decisions, the data quality just falls apart. So that's number one. Number two is the data shows basically when you have this larger systems with scaled up, accountability and ownership. It goes back to what Dave said. Who owns it, right? Everybody is quick to throw up their hands and say, "Oh, not me. It's him or it's her." Um, so the AI output and the decisions, once it gets into production, who owns it is exceedingly unclear. And then I think trust erodes. When problems start happening, I don't trust the system. Then humans get in and start manually manipulating stuff. And then going back to what Dave said, I think he's absolutely right. The measurement system, right? If you don't have the right measurement, the KPIs in place, it gets really difficult to prove what the value is. So I think those things break apart once you start scaling up.
If I have to jump in on this, I'd say
Yeah,
the
please.
first thing to fracture is measurement. So the pilots work in really controlled conditions. They're often with hand curated data and immediate feedback loops. But when you push the models into production, the lack of KPI level measurement becomes obvious. And without that backbone, prioritization gets fuzzy,
Hmm.
funding becomes unstable, and teams struggle to justify the continued investment. And that result is a familiar pattern. You have these promising prototypes that never become durable capabilities. So if you want to scale AI, you need to scale measurement consistently, transparently, and tied to real outcomes.
So let's take a step back a little bit. We talked a little bit about why organizations believe they're ready before they are, and Mergen had mentioned, some notes on some of those early wins with pilots. But I want to maybe revisit that really quickly. So I guess plainly, I guess Mergen, like, what are some of the things that you've seen, whether through the research or your experience talking with leaders within business, of like why those organizations believe they're ready before they are?
I think they see it as a technology journey, a journey. You get these new technologies, new shiny tool, and I'm getting very, very excited about it. So it's all about the tools, and they don't they don't seem to understand that it's really an organizational transformation. It's changing everything. It has to be embedded into every workflow, every process, every policy. It has to be embedded in there. And then human nature, got a lot of optimism. And you see AI pilots work, there's a lot of excitement. And I also think there is pressure to signal to the outside world. Look at me, I'm doing all this fancy stuff. Uh, so the signaling, the short-term rewards that come with it. So that signaling thing gives them the perception that they're doing really well and they really believe. It's not false. They really believe it, but it's really on a house of cards type of thing.
Dave?
Yeah, I'm going to jump right in there. I said the pressure to show momentum is incredible. So these early pilot wins get amplified into a
Yeah.
broad narrative of readiness. The simplest way to check actual maturity is to ask a couple questions. Do you have owners for model performance? Do drift issues get addressed systemically? Do we measure the outcomes in business terms, not technical ones? How many times have you heard somebody talk about their AI program and they're measuring utility not ROI. We have this many users that are doing this.
Yeah.
Well, what did they generate from that? We're not quite ready to tell you that. So if those things aren't in place, what you have is potential, but not preparedness.
So I'm
And if
gonna
I can just jump in there,
Oh,
when you talk
please,
about
yeah.
use, I mean, you can have actual good use, you can have disuse, you can have misuse, and you can have abuse, right? And the last three don't really count.
Let's shift a little bit towards some of the other results that we saw. I thought that was a great way to start the conversation. So one of the other things that the report really keyed in on was that data quality, which has been issue, for many years now, um, has really started to show how AI has changed the stakes with data quality. So I mean, how long have we been talking about garbage in, garbage out? Obviously that it continues to be the case. So models that are trained on flawed data, they simply scale those problems faster than they would otherwise. And so what used to be tolerable for reporting or analytics is now direct risk to AI outcomes. We've been talking about this here at Precisely for the last few years, and trust in ROI, as Mergen had mentioned, in our last question, the tend to erode, and especially as organizations are exploring more autonomous and agentic AI use cases where the trust in that information is going to require even higher integrity. So I'm interested in understanding, like, and we'll start with you here, Dave. Like, why has data quality been underfunded so long?
I think you have to look at the incentives in organizations. Speed has been rewarded more than accuracy. So for years, the mindset was that data quality could be fixed later. We can fix that up in post, and that technical teams could patch the issues downstream. So quality has been treated as a cost center, not a strategic enabler. AI has fundamentally changed that equation. Poor data used to call as small scale, human addressable issues. Now it creates compounding risk, bias, drift, misalignment, and compliance exposure. So once AI entered the picture, data quality stopped being a background concern and became a forward facing risk that leaders could no longer ignore.
Morgan?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. To me, historically, data quality is, as long as the reports that were generated from the data were good enough to support the decision, that's fine. You can get by. It really didn't matter. So they saw it as an indirect thing and a long-term thing, as Dave said. Oh, you can fix it down the road. As he said, it's amplified now. AI is really, it's a continuous process, and real decisions are being made in real time, right? You have to depend on those AI systems. So little problems now got expanded. So I think that's really one of the problems where AI is really revealed, like, showing the cracks in your data. And I think that's the bottom line there.
Well, let's double click on that. Like, what changed, once AI and now, this next wave with agentic and autonomous AI like entered the picture? What really changed for data quality at that moment?
I want to echo what Mergen said on this. When systems can act autonomously, then data quality issues just don't distort the outputs, they distort actions. And that shifts the conversation from a technical hygiene to risk management. AI grade data needs to be observable, governed, contextualized, and continuously monitored.
Mm.
And it's no longer enough to clean the data and move on. You need a full ecosystem of provenance, lineage, trust signals, domain aware validation. So agentic AI didn't change the need for quality, it
Okay.
exposed how much that need had been underestimated.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think about an agentic AI, it just doesn't analyze like the traditional system. It just doesn't analyze your data. Now it's actually, as you said, triggering decisions, making recommendations. It's all automated. So that has absolutely, flipped everything on its head to say, what's really important here. Um, so since AI systems operate continuously, it's not like a one-off, not
Mm-hmm.
periodic. Bad data compounds even faster.
So are organizations setting a high enough bar for their AI grade data and their AI readiness in general? Dave?
no. Like, if you want a one-word answer out of me, you're going to get that one in that way. It is no. I mean, the real challenge isn't just improving data quality, it's measuring it. So nearly a third of the participants in the survey cite measurement as the biggest gap. So without clear programs can't compete for investment or attention. And even where the programs exist, few have reached that level of continuous monitoring, optimization, or defined SLOs, the service level objectives, for model can quantify what good looks like. They'll continue to underestimate the debt that they're carrying.
Yeah, let me be strong. I'll say absolutely not. They're still aiming for analytics grade data, and that's insufficient for AI. And you think about AI grade data, it looks for consistency, traceability, timeliness, contextual richness, not just accuracy. And I think one of the biggest problems is having the capabilities, the skill sets to be able to deal with the data, the AI grade data that's needed. And I think we are still measuring things with old standards, and we haven't moved up to the AI world.
You preempted something. We're going to get back to that here in a little bit. So hold some of those thoughts, especially on the skills piece. Obviously, that's a major component in making sure that these initiatives and ensuring that delivering real business value around AI can actually happen. Before we get to that, I want to dive a little bit into some of the findings around governance within your AI programs and within your data strategy in general, right? Because I mean, we may be talking about AI as one of the major components here, but I think when you're implementing AI for any specific challenge within an organization, it still comes back to some of the same data strategies that we've been talking about for so many years. So one of the clear signals that we had in the research is the role of data governance, and organizations with governance programs are consistently reporting higher trust in their data and better AI outcomes. And the strongest performers aren't necessarily treating AI governance as something to separate, but it is an extension of the existing data governance programs that they have within the organization to cover AI, and really to be a part of the data culture that organization has. So Dave, I'm going to come back to you, and I know that we certainly talk about this here internally at Precisely as well. But why is governance emerging as a strong differentiator for those that are trying to be successful with their data strategies?
So you're going to ask that question to a chief data officer, and you're going to get a very obvious answer out of this. But this is because governance has evolved from a compliance exercise into an operational enabler. So teams that have strong governance, they move faster because they have clarity, they have clear ownership, clear definitions, clear processes. Governance creates traction. When strategy and governance reinforce each other, the organizations generate trust more consistently, and they scale AI more predictably. It's the difference between building on bedrock and building on sand.
Morgan?
Yeah, to me, I look at it as, I like to visualize things and think about a foggy night, you're an organization, everything is foggy, you're really not sure what it is. Governance is that beacon. It provides the clarity. You see what's happening. You see what's happening with ownership. You see what's happening with standards. You see what's happening with accountability. You know what acceptable use is. So it allows you to move faster through this fog, right? And fewer decisions. You have to search less. There's less negotiation on what needs to be done, who owns it, etc. And what the research shows is this clarity leads to trust, right? And the research also shows that when companies have mature governance, it's directly related to trust, and it's directly related to outcomes. So I think AI amplifies the cost of a weak governance system. And so it's critical to have that. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to jump on you, but I think you've highlighted an interesting thing there, which is you talk about mature governance. So mature governance isn't just having policies and processes in place. It's having the ability to evangelize that across the organization. I look at the role of a CDO in today's world as not being a back office troll as much as being the front face of data to the organization. And so we have to communicate not only its value, but the assets that we have provided so that the organization embraces those. The easy thing for someone to say within the organization is, oh, we have no governance, we have no quality data. And that's all a perception, because we need to put the metrics out there, and we need to be that forward face, that marketer for our data assets to the organization, but also to highlight what is ready. Not all data in the organization has equal stance in this. So our ability to say, this is our AI ready data to build this kind of model off of. And we're working and evolving these other data sets because it's progress over perfection that we have to focus on within the organization.
I've had the pleasure of going to a lot of these kind of analyst conferences over the last couple of years, and there's been, especially over the last 18 months, we've seen a lot of confusion. Like, I'm on the floor, we're talking to a lot of, visitors coming to talk to Precisely, and there's been a lot of confusion and misunderstanding around AI governance. So I'm just going to pose that very quickly. What are organizations' misunderstanding about AI governance? And Dave, I'm going to start with you.
I think that many assume that they have to create a completely separate AI governance program from scratch. But the research shows just the opposite. The most successful organizations extended their existing data governance to cover AI. So AI governance shouldn't produce more paperwork. It should produce automation. So think about guardrails, golden pathways, embedded controls, far more effective than committees or documents. So that governance that scales with AI is governance that lives in code and not in PowerPoint.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Companies think they think about governance as something that's really heavy, something that's a real nuisance. It's a pain. It has to be centralized. That, as Dave said, that's what the research shows, that it could be extended from your current data governance. To me, it has to be something that's thought of upfront, right? It has to be part and parcel of your design. Retroactive governance doesn't work. It only disrupts everything that you have. So it has to be part of the architecture, not just an oversight. So think about governance right from the beginning. It's part of your design.
How do you, to that point about some folks, thinking this is not just AI governance, but governance in general is almost like a deterrent, So how do you scale AI without slowing innovation within the organization? Or, how are we thinking about that here at Precisely, Dave?
I'm going to go back to that concept, turn governance into code. When you embed the guardrails directly into the development and deployment pipelines, teams can move faster because they don't have to stop and negotiate compliance. They have automated data contracts, pre-approved policies, and the continuous evaluation suites that are allowing us to create a safe, repeatable path. So governance, to your point, isn't a break. It's traction that allows the innovation to accelerate without losing control.
Yeah, and I would add, what I would say is, and I completely agree with what he said, and what I said earlier was start early, embed it. But I also the last thing I would add to this is it has to be part and parcel of your culture. People should be thinking in through the lens of the governance, right? Rather than looking at it as nuisance, think of the guardrails, the policies, the ownership. If that's part of the fabric of the organization, it really wouldn't slow innovation down. You'll be adapting it much faster.
And Morgan, what I would say we try to do with this is create a frictionless experience around governance. So I look at governance as the supple leather glove of enablement rather than the iron fist of governance. So how can we meet our business users where they are and helping them to meet their objectives? And again, as we've opened up a lot of these SaaS systems across our organization, we now have a lot more data entry points from folks who may not be schooled in our data principles. And so rather than interrupting their work, how do we accept the input from what they're doing and then make that a fit product within our architecture? So I tend to phrase that as passive governance rather than active governance. Active governance often interrupts somebody in the flow of their work and says, it is verboten for you to move forward in this way. Passive governance meets them where they're working, accepts their input, and then looks at how we can create a curated data product off of that is fit for purpose.
So we're going to look at one of the other major differentiators that emerged in the research, and first-party data alone isn't enough to support confident decisions or accurate AI outcomes. So you think about a lot of the data that an organization itself is producing, but so often there are still gaps within that information. And the research shows that near universal adoption of location intelligence and third-party data and data enrichment, because context is what turns raw data into something that is decision ready. And the challenge isn't whether to use context, it's how well it's governed and how well it's integrated. And I think to some of the points that Mergen was making before around the skill set and literacy that are within the organization that can take advantage of this type of information. And I'll add one thing on top of that, is that those gaps that do emerge within that first party data are looking to part of the completeness of the information, the overall integrity or quality of that information, and the opportunities that emerge to be able to take advantage of that location-based information or real-world context, as I like to think about it. So, I'm going to turn to you, Mergen. Here, it's like, why is real-world context so critical for AI outcomes that we're seeing within the market today?
Yeah, but that's an interesting question. In the old days, you were happy with AI detecting patterns. I mean, that was great. But as more and more companies have AI and there's more and more data, and there are different types of data. I mean, you think about unstructured data, location data is one type, but then you can have audio and video and all sorts of different types of data which are sending different types of signals. And the more you have those and the more you can integrate those, right, the stronger your competitive edge. So for a company to use AI properly, it has to have the situational awareness, right? You need to understand the time, the place, the consequence, etc. And that's why organizations are sort of heavily, investing in this area just to enrich their data. So the competitive edge comes from the synergistic effects of using all these different types of third-party data and how you integrate them well. And your models get even better when you can integrate it. Rather than optimize patterns, now it's really helping you with real-world decisions. It also stops overgeneralizing with through patterns. So I think the context it turns intelligence into judgment. And that's really important. It's all about the data being able to just change patterns into judgment to make good decisions. And at the end of the day, it's the value proposition.
I agree. And I would say that context is what actually makes AI actionable. So the models without context can function technically, but they rarely align to business reality. So adding that real world information, locations, boundaries, demographic signals, risk profiles, that connects the predictions to outcomes that leaders can measure and trust. So I agree with you, Mergen. Like, context is what closes the gap between a theoretically accurate model and a practically valuable one.
I like to think about these things because I think for a lot of folks, and we're actually going to move to this here in a few minutes around like kind of skills and data literacy. And I think about some of these components through the lens of spatial data literacy. That can be quite challenging when you think of it. It's almost like this esoteric topic, but I think when you really step back and you think about how we use location-based information in our everyday lives and the use cases that we have, as whether I'm looking for a new home, or I'm looking for a restaurant that I want to take my family to, or whatever, what's the best route for me to get to the theater this evening, whatever it is, right? We use location in our day-to-day lives every single day. And so for me, that's a great way to be able to talk to the types of ways that we could take advantage of real-world context in business, as well as obviously within our personal life. So as we look at ways that organizations are seeing their biggest returns from using location intelligence and data sets and data enrichment from organizations like Precisely, that's the ways that I think about that is how can you take these large challenges that organizations have, and we can place them in a real world context and make it easier for folks that are decision makers within the business to get their hands on this type of information and ask everyday questions in plain language to AI systems and be able to make decisions off of that information. An example that I'll provide if we're going to talk about some use cases, and I am preempting this next question around where we're seeing some of these biggest returns. I was talking to an executive at an insurance organization back in November of 2025, and we were chatting about like, hey, like what are some easy ways that we can get into the hands of some of our folks in the field, like to be able to find new areas to sell into, or to be able to build relationships with folks. It's like, well, is there a way that we can actually build this into a system that I can have reps be able to ask simple questions of a system and have it answer those questions based off of the context. One of the examples that we were talking about was, hey, we knew that there was a hailstorm that moved through a specific area of the country last night, and instead of having to then run an entire analytic and have GIS experts or data scientists go and run this analytic, is there any way that I can simply ask the system, hey, how many policies were potentially impacted within that zip code that this hailstorm ran through? Now that may seem like a very simple and rudimentary example, but that's putting the power of that analytic into the hands of someone that perhaps wouldn't never know how to find that answer on their own, outside of perhaps doing a visual analysis, looking at a map and seeing how those things all line up. So that was a simple way of how people can actually get a lot of value out of taking advantage of location data and spatial analytics without ever having to necessarily know how to perform that on their own. So that's sort of that's a very simple and rudimentary way for me to answer that question. But Dave, I was wondering if you had any thoughts about where are we seeing organizations getting the biggest returns on enrichment information and location intelligence at large?
I think enrichment drives returns on two levels. Operationally, it improves precision, reducing failed deliveries, improving the loss ratios like you were talking about, and enhancing customer targeting. That's really one focus. But strategically, it makes decisions smarter. So you have the better site selection, you have stronger fraud detection, more resilient network planning. So enrichment transforms generalized intelligence into a domain-specific capability, and that's where the real ROI emerges.
And then what about Morgan? I'll turn to you on this. With what governance, privacy, or integration challenges still stand in the way for location intelligence and data enrichment?
So according to the study, basically, one of the major challenges that companies are facing is simply integrating third-party data. I also found that, outside study, integrating your own data that come with different signals, different types of data, different types of unstructured data is technically complex. And then on top of that technical complexity, it's the privacy and governance concerns, right? When you start using external data, there's so many different things that you should be thinking about in terms of privacy. Putting all those things together, what the data really tells, or the study tells us, is that the organizations lack the skills to be able to integrate and govern and manage these types of data sets. So skills come up again on how to use this responsibly.
Morgan, I think one of the interesting points that you come to is that sometimes we think of this as external enrichment, but you point out that most companies today have a broad range of SaaS applications across their ecosystem where the context that they're looking to add is from another system, and the end user doesn't know that. I mean, the customer doesn't know what system they're engaging with. So it's incumbent on us to manage that complexity and be able to integrate to a common model with that context. And I think the challenge that we're going to come out of this is an emerging challenge is contextual lineage, because it's no longer enough to know where the data came from. You need to know where the enrichment came from for that data as well. And so what license, what was the update cadence, what are the purpose limitations? And without that clarity, trust breaks down. So contextual lineage ensures both auditors and engineers understand the constraints and can use that data confidently.
One of the big things that I've seen with organizations having the difficulty, getting more and more value out of their location data, has been a lack of skills, as I had mentioned before, and some of the data literacy, the spatial data literacy. So I think that sort of is a nice transition into our next question. And that's, many organizations have invested heavily in AI platforms here over the last couple of years and in the infrastructure to be able to support them. But scaling AI is where things tend to break down. We had talked about that a little bit at the top of the conversation. And the research shows that skills shortages, especially around deploying AI at scale in real business environments, are just as limiting as the technology gaps themselves. Tools without the right talent don't scale at all. So, Mergen, like how much of the infrastructure problem, that we saw in some of the research is really a skills problem, and how can we start to fill that?
Yeah, it's a huge portion. The data shows us that organizations already have the platforms, they have the cloud infrastructure, they have the tools in place. But what's missing is once you build it, how do you deploy it? How do you monitor it? How do you adapt it? How do you use it? How do you do this in a live environment outside that pilot that we talked about? And then in addition to the infrastructure, how do you understand the value proposition and understand the business problem and how the technology helps to solve that business problem? And all that takes skills, right? From a business perspective, from a technical perspective, etc. And the data shows that that's sadly lacking in organizations, and that's something they're struggling with. And when we talk about capabilities and skills, it's not just people. It's about people, processes, policies, governance. It's just not technology. So it's not, and you can't look at those separately. You need to look at it together. It's a holistic system. And you need skills to be able, an understanding of business and technology to be able to put those things together. So I think that's really where there's a huge problem in organizations today.
Morgan, when looking at the data, I thought this was one of the most dramatic stats that we got out of this. When 87% said their infrastructure was ready, and yet nearly half still cited as a challenge. And that is a clear signal that this gap isn't hardware or software, it's the human capability. And so organizations don't necessarily need more data scientists. They help, but they need integrated skill sets. So think data engineers, platform engineers, ML engineers, governance architects, and domain translators, which you were pointing out, how to get the business context out of that data. So that's a full stack capability problem, not an individual contributor problem. That skill distribution shows balanced shortages across all the capabilities. No single hire or no single role is going to fix that.
What breaks down when organizations try to scale AI and analytics operationally?
I don't think AI breaks down. AI can be scaled. It's not the AI, it's everything around AI. The infrastructure, the integration, the ownership, the data, the decision workflows. Those are things that break down. Now, if you think about pilot versus a production AI, there's a difference, right? Pilots work because it's not a nice, safe, protected environment. Production AI isn't, right? So it really, when you get into production AI, it really exposes things that were problems for years, but AI sort of brought that out. So I think these latent risks, things that are invisible, that's under the water, they are the ones that really start showing up and start breaking down. And as I mentioned earlier, the responsibilities when things start breaking down, there's no clear owner. And that just multiplies the problem.
You're so right. I mean, ownership on one piece of this, feedback loops on the other part. And in pilots, the monitoring, the drift checks, the rollback mechanisms, the cost controls, they're often manual and immediate. But at scale, those become fragmented or inconsistent. So without strong feedback loops, the models drift, costs rise, and incidents multiply. So operational AI needs continuous observation and response, not a one-time setup.
What do leaders underestimate about running these programs in production?
I think they should need to understand that it's not a project with an end date. It's continuous, right? So it's not like you do it and you're done. So it's an ongoing operational capability that needs continuous monitoring, continuous adjustment, accountability. As Dave said, the feedback loop. And trust is not a one-off deal where, I create trust and then I can move on. You need to establish and you keep going. Dave used the word friction before. Governance, they need to understand that, governance gets, framed as friction, but you need to understand the role of governance, how it aligns, how it keeps AI stable and aligns it with business. Another thing they need to understand is don't expect this fast ROI.
Mm-hmm.
The data shows, companies were showing this return on investment. But then they're really surprised when things get so fragile and the ROI starts dropping. Because if you don't have the governance and the operational models in place and they don't mature with the technology, your return on investment is going to start slowing down. So there's a lot of excitement, but people need to understand this is a long journey. And you need to think about the culture of the organization and how you embed it in all the workflows.
Absolutely. Durable AI is an ongoing commitment, not a launch event. And I keep hearing these sort of metaphors where like, oh, this is a sprint. And you sort of had this idea that you cross the finish line and you're done and there's celebrations and medals are handed out. And then there's the recognition like, well, no, it wasn't a sprint. And so we change the metaphor and we say, well, maybe the distance was just a little bit longer than a sprint. So I'll make it a marathon. And we'll do the same thing. Now, 26.2 miles later, somebody crosses the finish line, medals get handed out again, and we're done and wrapped up. But I think we need to think about durable AI as a lifestyle change, not just a race. And so this is eating right, doing your fitness every day. It's part of that operational capabilities. So yeah, building the model is the visible part of the work, but sustaining it, refreshing that data, monitoring the compute, versioning the models, maintaining the pipelines, running observability tooling, that's where the real cost lives. And that's where that needs to change the narrative from a sprint or a marathon to a lifestyle.
I'm gonna throw a little bit of a curveball here. We hadn't talked about this yet. So how do we close this skills gap? Like if this skills gap is such a big part of scaling these initiatives, and it doesn't even have to be AI. It can be, because there's a lot of other analytics and operational use cases that are extremely important right now in our business and in the market in general. Like how do we close these skills gaps? And Mergen, I'll throw it to you to you first.
That's a really good question, and that's a question that has existed for a very, very long time. I think there's two sides to the coin. Side one is people who actually use it in organizations, right? So they have the practical knowledge, they're seeing real problems. Then you have professors, etc., and in universities who are teaching and instructing the students, right? Their mindset might be rather different from a more theoretical perspective. The two need to meet, and that's what we do at Labor, where external partners and the organizations tell us what the real world problems are, and that's brought into the curriculum. So students are prepared, once they go out there, they're prepared to deal with the real problems and understand exactly what's happening and having those skill sets. So those two, there has to be better collaboration and partnerships between universities and organizations, so the real problems are identified and sorted out, rather than having theoretical models that don't apply to the real world. Once those two meet, you have a better student with better skill sets, and the organization is going to see the value much faster.
Bergen, yes, and thank you for providing us with a number of very strong graduates enrolling into Precisely once they leave from Drexel LeBeau. When I look at our hiring, one of the things that I look for is what I call T-shaped, pie-shaped, or comb-shaped people. And so if you think of that, if the top branch of the T is sort of the broad areas of expertise, I'm looking for critical thinking, I'm looking for folks with a growth mindset that have skills that are not necessarily technical, but they're the ability to embrace and understand our business objectives and communicate across the organization. That's that broad, the top end of the bar. The vertical portion of this then becomes the skill that I'm looking for. And whether that's going to be in prompt engineering or machine learning engineering or data engineering, and when we think of that as being a single bar that ends up being T-shaped, within our organization, I look for comb-shaped people, folks that have multiple levels of discipline across different skill sets. They're not all the same level. It's just kind of a ragged comb tooth when you look at that. But those deep, that broad area of expertise and that ability for critical thinking is absolutely mandatory to be successful in this AI world.
And from my perspective, one of the big things that I always look for as well is the human element, especially as AI is becoming such a big part of our work lives. It's a lot of the soft skills that make a huge difference in being able to make these initiatives sort of seep into the organization and work properly and make the real impact that they can, and that those soft skills that bring people together, that allow us to mesh and work together as teams, are things that, when we're looking for folks for our team, that obviously it's almost a given. Yes, you have to have, whether that's the technical skill or the understanding of specific concepts and be able to properly leverage those, but it's those soft skills that really differentiate those that we're interviewing or that we're looking for and for open positions. I think that makes a huge difference. And I think one of the things that, I don't know if it was Dave or Mergen brought up, but the notion of the generalist in today's space. So those are other things that we're looking for that I find quite valuable in the process. All right. So as we sort of wrap up here, kind of quickly kind of close out some of the things that we talked about today. AI ambition is really high. Readiness is uneven. we had mentioned that kind of that gap multiple times throughout the conversation. Quality, governance, and context enable trust within the data strategy, within the AI strategy, within the organization, and skills and operating models are really determining whether AI scales. So if leaders, and Dave, we'll start with you to kind of round us out. If leaders can focus on just one thing heading into 2026, what should it be from an AI and data strategy perspective?
Building an integrated data integrity operating model. Hard stop. It's not a new program. It's not another platform. It's an operating model that unifies quality, governance, context, observability, skills, and business alignment. AI readiness isn't purchased. It's earned through consistency. So when organizations treat integrity as an operating discipline, everything else becomes more durable and more scalable. If we're serious about agentic AI, then data integrity becomes a risk control, not a back office cleanup.
I would say that shift your focus from tools alone and build a human and organizational capability. And that means investing in skills, your governance, data literacy, make those investments. And just remember, this is not a short-term initiative. It's a long-term operating capability. And going back to what Dave said, I think sustainability, scaling and sustainability is key.
Mergen, Dave, thank you so much for today's conversation. This was absolutely fantastic. I'm sure that the audience feels the exact same way. I look forward to doing it again in the future. To close this out, I think the biggest takeaway from this year's research is that AI is no longer a future priority. It's shaping data strategies right now. But what we've seen is that confidence often outpaces readiness. And data quality has moved from a technical issue to a business critical risk. Governance is proving to be the backbone for trust and scale. And ultimately, context, skills, and execution are what separate organizations that experiment with AI from those that truly operationalize it. So thank you again to our panelists for sharing such thoughtful perspectives, and thank you all for joining us. If you'd like the full set of findings, you can download the complete report at precisely.com/LeBeau report. Have a great day.